Mike, how are you this morning?
I'm great, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing really good, and I'm so excited for this conversation because the last time you were on the podcast, we didn't even talk about this right before we hit the recording button, but your episode launched the second week of March of 2020. So
Really?
so it was like the last podcast I did before everybody was talking about the world, shutting down, and
Right before we went off the cliff.
exactly. But I'm even the reason I'm so excited about this conversation is, we just got off a kick of doing a mini series on ESOPs. We've been talking a lot about, people are really, really intrigued about how to grow the company, how to decouple themselves from the business. Cause I've been talking about ownership versus management roles. And, then it was just like, you know what? We now can then bring this all together with Dr. Sabrina that was just on and with Craig. And I think it would just tease up with what you and Keystone, your approach is so different. And I just appreciate your guys' style, your approach, kind of just everything that comes with you guys and Keystone. So I'd love for the audience, before we jump right into it, just give a little your background of like how you got into recruiting and then kind of the primary focus of Keystone, because I think it's wonderful context.
Sure. So Keystone has been around now for almost 21 years. I founded the company with a partner back in 2002. And I'd come out of recruiting, sort of corporate recruiting. So I've been a recruiter in essence my whole career. But when I was in that corporate recruiting side, there were some things I saw from the vendors, the search agencies and so forth that I didn't care for. And so when I went out to create my own search firm, I said I want to do things differently. And one of those things was that we pay very close attention to the culture fit component, and we've added some things on top of our traditional recruiting process to really make sure we're getting at that core values match and the culture match. But what we've really done over the last 15 years or so, we've really become specialists in working with privately held business. That's really all we work with, and really even beyond it. And we only do the senior most positions in those organizations. So president, CEO, COO, CEO or CFO, really all we do today as far as positions and searches. But more than that, really what we've kind of become is we work with private owners, helping them to get where they want to go and help them build value in their business, help them get to the role that they want to be in, and all the things that you talk about. Enjoying what you're doing, making an impact, and building value at the same time. And so that's really what we help companies do. And that can take a lot of shapes and forms. It's some owners that want to step back and get out of the day-to-day and move into more of a kind of visionary role or a chair of the board type of role. Some that are preparing to sell the business because they're getting toward the end of their career, would like to sell and build the value and move that price up for the sale. Or that they want to have that partner in the business that allows them to get away from some of that day-to-day stuff and provide the things that they can best provide as an owner, and not have to worry about the all that day-to-day kind of stuff. So that's
I love it, man.
And that's what we do.
Well, and as I think about like how we can tackle this conversation is like, let's start maybe first before getting into the mechanics and some of like the how you guys and your approach and stuff like that. Mike, is like the mindset of the entrepreneur and owner. Because I know I covered a little bit with Dr. Sabrina and Craig, but it's like for you and what you've experienced, like I just think about all of the people that I talk to that call me up and they're like, I want out. Out of what? Your job, your asset. And then they don't know how to respond. And it's usually because they're just burnt out and they're just trying to just do everything with everything on their shoulder. So when you think about like, that's where some of the people listening are starting. It's like, when you think about like, what are the biggest like false narratives that entrepreneurs have in their head about hiring this next CEO president role? Does that make sense? The question makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think a lot of times, they feel like, there's nobody out there that could ever know this business as well as I do. I think they get stuck in some of those, like you said, that they're kind of doing everything and they can't seem to get away from it. What's really funny is that when you're coming up when you started your company and you're working in your company, you start to build this identity sometimes that I kind of do know everything, and people come to me to fix things, and your employees kind of give you the kudos of, wow, you know so much, and you're so bright, you're so you know the industry inside and out, right? And that can become kind of part of your identity. But then
And
when you get to
addicting.
the end,
And addicting.
yeah, very addicting, very
Yeah.
addicting. But then when you get to the end of that, and you want to go sell the business, the potential buyers come in and they say, you're too connected to this business. You know too much. And so it's a complete opposite, what they're looking at. They're saying, if you want to leave, you want to retire, and in essence, you're leaving the business, and there's not a lot of value here, and we're not going to pay for that. So I think, the exercise is really, how do you build that team that can run without you?
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes that there's, to your more directly to your question, I think there's this fallacy that we can never bring in somebody that would know it as well as I would. A team really can't do this. We couldn't operate without myself at the helm. What about all those relationships that I have? How would we transfer those kinds of things?
Mm-hmm.
Probably the biggest things that we see.
Well, and you just mentioned something that I want to pull the thread on, and I think, like, when I think about like the false narratives that I've heard plenty of times, and by the way, like, I think there's a legit reason, because they've never been exposed to what is it like to work with a rock star, and we're going to get to that, because I think if you haven't experienced it, then it's really just kind of this leap of faith. But so let's say for this example, the operational things. You can build a standard operating procedure, and you can build a job description of the mechanics of, like, all right, Mike, you're going to replace Ryan as the CEO. Here's a list of tasks and duties or whatever. I think maybe here's the question for you is what degree of anxiety of the owner thinking like what making this move is tied to the operations, or more so the relationships and the culture fit of their team and their suppliers, vendors, bankers, whoever it might be, of the ecosystem of people, where that's the anxiety, or is it the operational mechanics? Does the question make sense?
I think so. I think I don't know that I'll be able to separate those, though. I think it's a little bit different for each owner that I've met with and gotten to know. Some of them are very worried about the operational piece. How can we keep this thing going? Others, depending on kind of what they've been best at in the company, if they're the lead salesperson still, then it's about those relationships. How are we going to transfer those relationships? So I think a lot of owners that I've seen too over the years, because they've brought in people that weren't necessarily not good people, but they've put people in functional roles over operations, over sales, over marketing or finance, whatever it is, but they haven't ever seen anybody that can really truly run a business the way that they can. So they're looking at their functional leaders and saying, gosh, I don't see that person leading our finance team really being able to step up and understand how finance really interacts with sales and marketing and operations. They've just never seen it. And so it's hard for them to imagine how a president could come in and have that skill set to be able to really run something completely.
Yeah, super fast. Yeah, well, I really appreciate how you respond to that. And I think about, I've got a really good, one of my best friends from college. He runs a business, and these narratives I hear a lot. So if he probably doesn't listen to this because he just remembers me from 20 years ago. But my point is, I'm like, yeah, it's thinking about the functions and then not seeing that someone else is capable. But the question, or the response he always said to me, because I'm always pushing back, I'm like, dude, people, like, you're not a beautiful, unique snowflake is what he's my best friend, so I can say that, right? But so that, like, if someone can get over the hurdle of operationally, like, someone's capable of doing this, his pushback was like, well, why wouldn't they have their own business if they're capable of doing what I'm doing? How would you respond to that? Have you heard people say that before?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot of people out there that are a lot smarter than entrepreneurs, because they realize that running a business is way too hard. Starting their own business is way too hard. And some of the best presidents and integrators and chief operating officers and things that I've met, they absolutely know how to run a business. They just don't want to take that risk of jumping in and starting something on their own. And when you think about it, maybe they may be smarter than us.
100%, because I think about, like, the question that I've been asking a lot of people lately is, do you know if it's worth it? And then they just kind of look at me because the question isn't obvious on how to answer it, which kind of goes with the territory, like you were saying. So when you think like, I'm trying to think about how to thread this with like the conversation. I think about the cultural fit. You mentioned that quite a few times, and so like, let's say someone is coming to you and saying, okay, like, I just think the cultural fit is such a huge anxiety pain point for me, because like in my past, Mike, like you hire someone and like it's like dropping the word or the analogy that my dad always used to give was, you can put a drop of milk in a gallon of gasoline and you don't know the difference, but you can put a drop of gasoline in a gallon of milk and it spoils the whole thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I have hired way too many drops of gasoline in my past, and the exhaustion with that is so high. So even if they're functionally capable of managing the job, how do you assess this kind of intangible culture fit like you were talking about? How do you guys approach that?
It's a great question. The best way that I've found to assess that is really to boil it down to core values. And I know that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and it's almost become cliche. What are your core values? But the way that we look at that is, especially in a smaller privately held business, the core values of that owner, what gets them out of bed in the morning, how they behave on a day-to-day basis, how they treat their employees, how they treat their vendors, everything that they do on a day-to-day basis really is their core values, is reflective of their core values. And so the people that you want to bring into your organization have those similar core values. They operate the same way. They get out of bed for the same reasons in the morning. Now, that's not saying that, that everybody has to look the same color and creed and really all those kind of things, but it's those really things that are core, those unchangeable things about us that you want to have people sharing those core values. And so when we come into a new company client, we actually have the owner go through a core values exercise and really look at what are really driving my behaviors. What are those core values? What are those things that I value above all else in the way that I run my business and the way that I live my life? And then as we're looking at candidates, we are actually asking them to do the same thing, go through a core value analysis, and then we're using that as part of our interview process as well, to dig in further on that and make sure we're not finding there's no areas where they really are doing things in an opposite fashion.
So what do you do when you're sitting in front of an owner and they're filling out the core values and they're bullshitting themselves and you?
Well, yeah, there's a little bit of an art to that, but
a little bit. I'm assuming that this is. I can only imagine your emotional intelligence of you and your team of trying to spot these things. It's got to be like one of the most like sought out like skill sets that you guys have to have, because like if you don't match that up the right way, I mean, what the end result is going to be.
Right. Well, one thing that we do is that we have a tool that we call our culture blueprint, or core values assessment, and we ask them to do that over a period of time. We don't sit with them and just ask them the question. So we send it to them. There's some thought-provoking questions on there. There's a matrix exercise that they go through, ranking a bunch of core values words, and then they have to kind of play them off one another and choose, what do they really value one over the other. So they have time to think about it, and it's also set up in a way where, no core values are really bad unless they're going to drive you to unethical or illegal behavior. There's really not a bad set of core values. And so that this exercise is set up that way too. It's just about making choices. It's not about good or bad. I think where, companies will make some mistakes is, if they let the marketing team write the core values or let the HR team write the core values, it's not really getting there. If they're thinking about it in terms of what do we want our customers to know about us, or what do we want out there on the website, then they're not being authentic about it. And that's usually when we see where there's a mismatch. And so when we see that, where they're kind of repeating back to us what was on the website, we really kind of press. Is that really how it operates here?
Integrity, authenticity, and
And then we're checking with the employees as well, the leadership team in particular, having them go through that same exercise, and then we're asking questions. Is this what you see from the owner? Is this what you see on a day-to-day basis?
Well, why don't you unpack that a little bit more? So in your process, and what I'm kind of doing is kind of unpacking your process while we're kind of thinking about like talk about the mindset, then they start to say, okay, this might be a good idea. But like, so you're then not just working with the owner, you're working with the other management team. I mean, like what level of like understanding do you get, and how do you guys even capture, bottle up like what the essence and the spirit of that company is? Because I think about how many people talk about culture out there, Mike, and we're like, your outcome has to work, right? So you probably care more about culture than the people spewing culture, because it's not going to work if they don't stay,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how do you like, what kind of level of depth do you go to understand with the team, like what
Yeah.
what everybody's looking for?
Yeah. So there's two things that we do. So of course, when we get started with a new project, we come in and we meet with the owner and then the leadership team. And if there's a board of directors, we'll meet with them as well. And so we have a series of questions that we're going to ask. Some of those are very skill-based and industry-based. We want to understand how the company works, who they work with, who their clients are, all those kind of things. But then we'll also ask some questions just about culture and how things really happen on a day-to-day basis there, and how they work with their customers, how they work with their vendors, how they work with each other, what are their meeting cadence, how do they communicate with one another, those kind of things. And then we will ask them, to fill out this culture blueprint for us. And so in that exercise, they're going to go through answering some open-ended questions about their leadership style, when they've been happiest, least happy, and then they go through an exercise of those core values terms that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Really having to put one against another and say, okay, what am I really more about? Am I really more about loyalty or commitment? And what the psychologists say that work in core values, they say that really any human can only have 6 or 7 core values that really determine 95% of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis. And so this exercise really walks them through that process of getting down to what are my core 6 that really drive what I do.
Super cool.
So we have all the leadership team, each of them will do that independently. The owner will do that. And then we will look at those and see how aligned are they. Is everybody saying the same thing? And it's interesting because a lot of times what we'll see, when we first meet with the owner, they might say, I'm having problems with sales, or I'm having problems with operations, or we can't seem to get this over the hump, or whatever. And then we look at that core values thing and we say, gosh, that leader in sales has really got a different set of core values. They really are operating different than everybody else. And it kind of becomes clear on why there's some issues in the company.
So super fascinating. And when I think about like the situations you guys might walk into, like I'm kind of paint the scenario here is like, I can only imagine that. So if an owner who's also, I'm going to interchange for the listeners here, owner and CEO, because the whole point is replacing the leadership role while keeping potentially the equity right now. So in this situation, Michael, like if you walk into a team that's got like maybe 3 executives, and then the owner is determined like, hey, I want to open this up. I can only imagine that out of those 3 people, one of them at least wants to posture for that position. The owner might not know whether one of those people might be capable of doing that. And then like you're just dealing with a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty with highly paid, skilled people that impact the whole organization. How do you deal with that uncertainty where they're like, okay, not sure if it's going to be me, not sure if who's this person going to be, not sure if I'm going to want to work there. I might want to start placing my resume out place. How do you manage that chaos of uncertainty while you're approaching this process?
Yeah. Well, I think a big piece of it is the communication, and we're going to be meeting with that owner before we're meeting with the leadership team. And so one of the things that I'm always trying to impress upon them is you have to communicate this properly to your team. What are you doing here? Why are you doing this? Do you really feel like there's some people on the team that maybe could step up to this role? Last thing you want to do is give anybody any false hope and, tell them that, yeah, we think you can do this. And then, but we're going to go out and do a search, to do the comparisons, and then come back to them and say, oh, we didn't really think, you're really not the best fit. So the last thing we ever want to do coming in and working with a company is do harm to their culture, which those kind of things can really harm their culture. So communication is a really big piece of it. One thing that we do too with the one service that we provide for clients is that we have an assessment process where we come in and we'll assess internal candidates for the role. and give the owner back a report, and I'll spend some time with them as well, walking through that report, of course, on how well we think they fit, that role. Because I think what happens too sometimes, again, I think I mentioned before that sometimes the owner doesn't really know what that looks like what a president really looks like and what a president really should do, because especially for an entrepreneur where they kind of grew up in the business, they haven't seen presidents of other businesses. And so, giving them an understanding kind of based on the parameters of those type of roles of where does my internal people fit? Do they fit? Do they have the potential to kind of step up into a role like that? Or is it something better that, they stay in the type of role that they're in?
How often do you see that someone's got someone capable of actually becoming that president? Because as you alluded to at the very beginning, it was like there's like the functions, so you watch a lot of people doing things versus like the leader, like the kind of the bigger picture. Like, how is there a percentage, or is it just kind of very specific to each company?
Yeah, it is kind of specific. I don't know if I could put a percentage on it. I've certainly seen plenty of people who are capable of stepping up into those roles, and sometimes people who are even underutilized in their current role and are really ready to step up and take on more, and plenty who are not as well. So, but I don't want to make that sound like a good or bad thing. I mean, I think, kind of getting back to what I said about, somebody who can really run something. There's what I've found in my practice is that there's people out there that have that ability to really think cross-functionally, really think all the way across and understand kind of how the functions in a business work with one another. And when you do this in operations, this is what happens in finance. And when you do this in sales, this is what happens in operations. And that's a much smaller percentage of people out there. Entrepreneurs have it; they kind of have it naturally, but they
can see it, but they can't execute and follow through.
They can't execute it, but they can kind of see how those things connect.
You're included here, right? With that point to myself.
Yeah, but most people I find are more linear thinkers, so they can become very good in finance, they can become very good in operations, they can become very good in sales, but they have a hard time going across. And so it's not good or bad. You need strong people in each of those functional areas as well. It's sort of a different way of thinking when you do that.
Yeah, and then what would differentiate that person that's capable of doing that from maybe a typical entrepreneur, like you said, is the tolerance for risk and actually just making the plunge, right? So, because if you can do that, the question, why wouldn't you start your own? But then it's that whole risk profile.
And the ability to execute, but oftentimes with the searches that we do, the presidents or COOs that we're bringing into these privately held companies, they're someone that has spent some time in a bigger company, not necessarily gigantic, huge, but in companies where they've got some of that best practices experience and they know how to execute. So not only can they think cross-functionally, but they know how to execute, and they've learned processes and systems and things like that they can bring into the smaller company to help them get to that next level.
Is there certain set of personality tests, like the Colby, DISC, Myers, or any of that stuff that you guys use as a process for finding those kind of people?
Yeah. So we actually use a tool that's called the OmniView. And it was originally built by the folks at PDI, which is now part of Korn Ferry, but it's a separate company now. It's an assessment that measures a few different things. So it measures actually experience, personality, cognitive ability, and what they call competencies. And so I really like that kind of. OmniView is a great name for it. It kind of looks at it from a few different angles. There are some very good assessment tools out there too that are really personality based, and like the Colby, the DISC, Myers-Briggs, those kind of things are really based on personality traits and how those transfer over into work behavior. And I think that data is really valuable as well. But you have to understand that it's personality based, not.
Have you come across anything? So I was just listening to Keith Cunningham's book, The Road Less Stupid. I don't know if you've come across that book. Awesome book. He talks about the dumb tax, and I've paid lots of dumb tax. Let's put it that way. But he has one section in there. He talks about the importance of intrinsic motivation with essentially A players versus not having intrinsic motivation. How do you find that, assess that? I mean, is that, would you agree or disagree with this comment?
No, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I think that's absolutely part of it for an A player, and it's something that, for us, when we're recruiting, we're always recruiting kind of at that president or COO level. So we don't see many people that don't have that, quite to be quite honest. I mean, if they've kind of achieved what they need to achieve to be capable of this role, they typically have that. But there are different levels of that intrinsic motivation, and that is something that we'll see come out in some of those personality
Got it.
tests assessments. So the OmniViews personality piece, the Colby would tell you some of that. The PI would tell you some of that. So seeing that motivation level and what really drives them, yeah, be
Awesome.
critically important.
So as we move kind of to the motivation of the owner or entrepreneur that's then engaging with this, like, what are you seeing that people like? Why would someone say, okay, now is the time? Like, because like what is led up to the point where they're now having a conversation with you generally?
Yeah. So I think you mentioned one before. It's like they've been working in the business for a long time and they're frustrated. They're like, I just can't do this anymore.
Just pure exhaustion.
I just can't be on the hotline 24/7 anymore. I need to have some balance in my life, and they want to move into some type of a different role in the business where they don't have to be there every day. And so that's a big motivator. We see that a lot. Um, we also see, though, that companies that realize that they want to grow and they want to build value in the company, and they're honest about with themselves that maybe my best suit is the sales side, and I'm not great at running the day to day and managing people and process and all that stuff. And so let's get somebody in here that can do that, so I can use my unique abilities to contribute to this business the best way possible, and we can grow further than we would with just me at the top of the organization. And then some that are, getting toward the end of their careers, and they're just looking at, what am I going to do next? I want to retire. Am I going to sell? Am I going to sell to a private equity or a strategic, or am I going to sell to my employees, or am I going to hand it to a family member? Those kind of things, and sometimes we've seen companies that have, owners that have tried to sell and have gone out and sort of shop themselves around a bit, and then I've heard what I mentioned before. You're too connected to the business. You need to have a stronger team. You need to have sustainable revenue when you're gone.
It's so interesting, Mike. I mean, honestly, like I should refer you everybody over that calls me and says I want out, because they don't want out of their asset generally. And it's like the horror story that I've heard more times than I can count, which is I wanted out, so I sold, but then half of it was tied to an earnout. So now I actually still have my job and a boss, and I have no control. It's just like the opposite of what they wanted, they actually got. So it's how many people that are starting conversations with you understand and have clarity on the ultimate end goal and how it all works?
Yeah, and hard to put a percentage on it, but I'd say very few. I think the other, I asked what precipitates this. I think it's generally when they have somebody in their ear, whether it be someone like yourself,
legitimately
or an accountant, someone that says, you know what, you're not setting yourself up very well here for the next stage. You need to start thinking about this differently. That's a big trigger for when they call us.
Or it's their spouse saying, hey, enough.
Yeah. How many of them kind of get that before they start working with someone like yourself, or before their accountant gets brave and tells them, but not very many. Not very many. But I think that's human nature, and I know I'm the same way. It's until I've gotten to the age where I am now, it's kind of, you just put your head down and you work hard, and you're not thinking about that until you get to an age where it's like, okay, maybe I better start looking at the next step, the next stage.
So let's talk about what it means to, because I want to talk about how you go find people and how that works, and then kind of getting into like the process, more like the process, to kind of just give people like a visibility. If people have never, hired a recruiter, especially for this kind of level, I think it's going to be helpful to just kind of demystify the process of it. But like when I think about it, before we start that, Mike, you had mentioned right before we hit record that, the comp plans and stuff like that. Let's talk about like what kind of price range. And I don't want people to be freaked out. And maybe Mike, just for 1 minute, I'll give kind of like a philosophical approach of like the whole point of like what Dr. Sabrina said in the past is like how to like afford this person. Like the whole point is do this when you can see you can have visibility in that you can afford this salary. So the salary should make sense with the size of the organization. But I just want to put that context. I didn't want people to like clam up and not listen because of the price tags. But this is something that I think everybody can shoot for. So like what are the expectations of someone that is in the C-suite at the size of companies that you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. It does vary depending on a few things. So the size of your company and the geographic market that you're in. Some markets are more expensive than others. But, generally what we're talking about with, let's just say you're 15 to $20 million a year organization, to really bring in a president or COO that can really has that capability of running the business, you're probably talking in the mid 200s on a base salary basis. And then you're also looking at a bonus structure, and typically, bonus year over year bonus, somewhere probably 30 to 35% of their base salary. But that's got to be earned. They got to hit their goals for the year to get that. And then in almost every single project that we work on these days, there's also a long-term component that goes along with that. To get the best people, the people that you need in these roles, you got to have a long-term compensation plan. So I know you had Craig on in your last podcast, and I absolutely agree 100% with what he talked about. That there's and I'm not talking generally about real equity here. We're not giving away. I generally don't recommend real equity except for some very special situations. But if this person that you bring in is helping you grow the value of the business, you should be sharing some of that with them.
And it's the cheapest comp plan you'll ever have because they're doing the work.
And I do see a lot of time, fairly often, owners will say, they'll kind of project out some of these plans and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to pay this person $1 million over 5 years or 10 years. But I have to come back to them and say, but that's only if you make 10 million. Right. So you're only sharing those things with them if you're building value in the business, and when you go to sell the business, you're going to get an exponential amount above what you've shared.
I always hear that same pushback too, Mike, and I don't know if it's from the fact that I was born and raised and managed a sales organization. The amount of people I've come across, it's like, oh, we have our salespeople at a cap, and I'm like, you want your salespeople to make $800,000 because that means if the comp plan's designed correctly, that means you made a shitload of money. And so there's this whole do you hear like the mindset too of like, well, that could have been my money. It's kind of like that circle reasoning of like, well, I could have that. And it's like, how do you usually help people think through that?
Yeah, and that's yes, I hear that all the time. But what I have to remind them is that you've come to me, someone like me, or looking to hire someone like this because you determined that you don't want to put in that. There's something that you want to do differently. You want to get out of the day-to-day. You don't want to be there on the hotline 24/7. You're getting to the age where you've kind of, you're tired. And so you really won't be able to do that by yourself. Or if you do, you're going to have to trade, the other things in life you want to do. You're going to have to work as hard as you did when you first started the business. So it's, you're trading off there, and you're giving just a percentage of that gain to this individual that helped you get the gain. And we have lots of examples where people go off and owners, they go off and they start, living their best life. They go do something else, and they're maybe still connected to the business on a part-time basis, or as the chair of the board, or what have you, and doing the things that they want to do, and they watch the business grow, and they're collecting checks.
I've always said, no one calls me up and says, I want out of my mailbox money. It's usually their job.
Yeah. And I know I make it sound like it's easy and it's just like an ATM machine, but I mean, that's what you ultimately want to set up, unless you want to just sell out. And I find that a lot of owners don't really want to do that because they're worried about what happens to their employees, what happens to where the company's located. And at that point, they're not going to be involved anymore. You can't say, well, I'm going to keep my best clients and just work with them, quarter time next year. when somebody else owns the company. You don't make those decisions anymore.
Well, this is truly like the ability to transition when you're talking about your identity and like really just taking some time to think without having to make the decision. This is truly, like you said, positioning yourself for truly options, because options to think, options to explore, options to collect some checks. And when I'm thinking now, as we're kind of moving forward, is like when you're going and you're taking, you've identified a comp plan, like some version of whatever Craig was talking about in the previous episode. So when you're going out and finding these people, where are you finding them? And like, not only were you finding them, but the process of like, I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to articulate what I'm thinking here is like, so in my past, Mike, I've had it where like the perfect person is not where you would think. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I've, it can kind of what Dr. Sabrina was saying too. So like, yeah, maybe just what's your approach of finding these people and vetting them out?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that we're kind of generally looking for when we're doing these positions is we're looking for somebody that's been where you want to go. So I think I mentioned before that, we're looking at people that are probably coming from something at least a little bit bigger than you are. So because the difference between how a $30 million company operates and a $50 million company operates are very different. And so that's one of the things that we're typically looking for, someone that has been in a leadership role at a company that's been to the heights of where you want to go. Okay. So they
but not too big where it's like you're
not so big that they had 4 admins and all that kind of stuff.
Didn't actually do anything.
Didn't actually have to do anything, right? So that's kind of one of the general things that we're looking for. Then we're looking for that cross-functional leadership experience, and that they've been able to demonstrate that they've actually run something. I tell my recruiters that my recruiters will gag if you said that to them, because I say it so many times here. Have they run anything? Have they really run anything? So that's, we're always looking for that. But then from there, it becomes much more customized into kind of the industry. We're looking for people that, and not always the same industry.
That's what I was going to ask. So yeah, like how do you get like creative when you're like?
In fact, I think some of the most successful placements that we've made have been someone who's coming from an adjacent industry, something that's similar but not exactly the same, because they bring some new ideas, from other industries into this.
I can almost see like you could like I could almost envision like business model, like manufacturing, professional services, e-commerce, SaaS, or something like that. Because then there's a lot of diversity underneath that.
That's a great example. We find that if there's a connection in the business model. So how do you kind of go to market? Are you selling through independent distributors? Are you selling with your own salespeople? Are you geographically dispersed all across the country and people working from home, or are you all in one building? Those kind of things are much more indicative of success than specifically finding somebody from my industry. And I think a lot of times in hiring, people will take that shortcut, like, well, if they were successful at one of my competitors, that means they'll be successful here, and that's absolutely not true.
And the reason your competitor, and there's a reason your competitor is happy that you have this person.
And very, very different cultures, very different, and how they go to market, those kind of things. So that's some of the things that we're looking for. But then, like I say, we get very customized too in terms of the cultural fit and some of those other things. But every project that we do, we start out as it's a research project. So we go out, we identify who are the people that are leading companies in these adjacent industries.
And are you looking same geographic location? And I'm assuming these people have jobs, because I'm assuming people.
Yeah, 95% of the people that we reach out to are currently working for somebody else, because that's honestly where the best people are, and very few people are out of work these days. So we're going out and identifying. First, we start with the companies. Who are those companies in those adjacent industries and the same industries? And we're kind of drawing a geographic, circle and saying, let's go 200 miles away from, out from wherever we are. And then also we're looking at, a lot of times when we're like in the Midwest, for example, we'll be looking for candidates that maybe they moved to California 10 years ago, but would love to come back to the Midwest.
That's brilliant.
We can figure out that they went to University of Minnesota or something like that, and so those are high value targets for us, is to bring somebody back to the Midwest.
That's awesome. Just like a sales pitch. Like, come on, you want to go hang out with your family and make more money.
And we've had a lot of success, and that's partly due to the way the data is so good out there now. We can go out and find that about somebody in their background. So we identify the right backgrounds, and then we start reaching out to them. We don't, they're not in a database necessarily. We're reaching out and having a conversation, telling them we're working on behalf of XYZ company. This is what we're looking for. This is what the company's trying to do. You look like the type of person that could maybe do this. Can you tell me more about your background and if this might be interesting to you? And every search we do, we'll reach out to 150, sometimes 250 people that we've identified. They have that right, something in their background tells us they might be a candidate. And then we start to narrow it down with the people that are, if they express interest, then we start to screen them. And then
what kind of questions
layers of screening.
What kind of questions do these people and these candidates ask you guys?
They want to know. That's a great question. They actually want to know. They want to know what the plans are for the business. Where is this owner trying to take the business? They want to know what that owner is like, what the culture is like. What does this person really value? They don't ask it that way, but they ask it in terms of tell me about the culture, tell me about the customer set, and then where do we think the opportunities are for the company? Like, does it look like there's growth opportunities for the company? And because what good executives, they're not afraid of challenges, but they want to know that if I'm going to make a move to another company, what I'm bringing to the table is going to help move that company forward. And
that's
so,
awesome.
And they're all going through a pros and cons list, right? Of, should I stay where I'm at or should I go to this new opportunity? And when that,
I can only imagine that
outweighs the cons list to make the move, that's when they'll take a look.
I can only imagine that, like, if I was a president getting recruited, like how many questions I'd have for that owner. Like, if I'm getting in bed with you, like, what am I going to be dealing with, right? Because it's like, I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen where, like, there's people that have worked for privately held business owners and it's not gone well. How many more questions they probably have for you than someone that hasn't yet? Where in the list of like the things that are important to these people, like where does pay and all like that stack up compared to the vision, plan, culture, all that other kind of stuff?
Yeah. And, pay is certainly always part of the equation, but I can tell you that I've done a lot of successful searches where a person has moved for equal pay or sometimes even less pay. Culture always trumps pay and opportunity. So growth opportunity. Someone can see that if I come into this organization and I really help them with whatever it is, new product strategy, something, better people leadership, whatever it is going to take us to the next level. And then you have that long-term comp plan in place. And they can see, well, look, if I'm here for 10 years, I can really build some wealth and I can really do some fun work. Those two things, culture and the growth opportunities, usually outweigh the pay. Now, very few people on the front end will say, yeah, I'll just take anything you want to pay me. They're gonna say, here's where I am and I want to stay at least that level or more. But they will look at the whole package, especially that long-term comp package, as part of that.
I was talking to some friends who are in like executive roles, and it's like we were just kind of shooting the shit about like how they were processing these kind of decisions too. And it's like, what kind of topics am I going to be talking about? What are the headaches that are going to be associated with this, and what are the people I'm going to have to talk to? And is that equal to the money I think I'm going to be getting? Like, is that like a neutral, like all that makes sense? Because like if the headaches are worse and the topics are worse, I'm going to need more, you know what I mean? Like there's like this, somehow there's this equilibrium between all the intangible stuff and that pay, but the pay just has to accommodate for it. Because when you're talking these kind of numbers, an extra 50 grand, even though it's a lot of money, it's not going to completely sway someone's decisions would be my guess.
No. And like I say, it's, they will look at the total package and most executives, good executives are going to have some sort of long-term plan where they're at now. So they're going to compare those two plans to one another too. And then they're going to look at what, do I really think I can grow this organization? And there's a lot of factors that weigh into that. It's, can I work with the owner? Can I, can I put the team in place that I really need? Can, there's a lot of things that weigh into that on whether they think they can actually grow it. Is the market growing for them? Are they in the right space? Are they positioned well?
So you have then going back to the 150. So reach out to 150. Let's kind of walk through the steps of like getting these
Sure.
candidates. How does that? How do you dwindle it down, and then how do
Yeah.
you start
So,
introducing
they
them?
say we'll reach out to, it's not a arbitrary number, 150. What I tell my recruiters is we got to reach out to all of them that are that look like they might fit. And so let's just say it's 150 or 200 calls. A lot of those calls right away, they're going to say, sorry, can't move, not interested, whatever, but there's generally going to be 30 or 35 people somewhere in there that will say, yeah, that's something I might take a peek at.
Just take a
and,
peek.
and,
I love
yep.
it.
And then, we start to screen them from there. So we put them through a phone screen first, and then they kind of pass some of the basic things we're looking at that phone screen. Then we put them through a personal interview. But before we do that personal interview, we also have them go through that core values assessment that I mentioned before.
Got
So we
it.
have that when we do the personal interview, so we can tie in those culture pieces on that first interview. Then we narrow it down to to 5 or 6 that we bring to a client and present that to them. That part of the activity takes us about 55 to 60 days to get
Okay.
through all those calls, all those screens, get it down to those
With
5 candidates.
clarifying question. So is that 55 days? Is that after you've done the cultural assessment and the core values and all that
Yes,
stuff?
yes. That's the very
Okay.
first. That's the
Okay.
very first step of our process when we sign an agreement to start with a client. The first thing we'll do is go out to their location, meet with the owner, meet with the leadership team. That's what we call discovery.
Okay.
And from there, then we're going to build a position profile that we're going to use for recruiting, and then we start the
Got it.
recruiting process.
Okay.
After we get to that point where we've got those 5 to half a dozen candidates, we're presenting and we're making a recommendation. This is who we think are the very best. The client will then interview those candidates, and I'm a big believer that the best way to do that is to interview those candidates as close to back to back to back as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we will set them up in over a couple day or 3 day kind of period, so that they can get a real good sense of the differences and the comparison of those candidates. Because if you don't do it that way, you meet with somebody this month and then meet with somebody else next month and somebody else the month after that, you're going to lose candidates along the way, and it's also just hard to remember.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, well, it's interesting that it kind of like now you say like, you might have the chance of losing them, but like I was actually like thinking like the value that I immediately was thinking about, Mike, is it's like you get to compare them next to each other. And honestly, like the most impactful, like on this entire topic, my personal experience that was the most impactful in my entire perspective on this, and is when we hired Robert Half. And they didn't do any of the approaches that you're talking about. But what I ended up doing for one of the steps, like the main step, is I interviewed 14 CIOs back to back. I don't know if it was one day or if it was 2 days, but like it was the first time, because I went from the anxiety of like how do we find these unicorns all over to holy shit, there's a lot of them. And like I think I used the word, I went back to our team and I was like, I went shopping today. I went shopping for a human being, because it was the first time I was able to compare, like if I'm going to pay $175 plus bonus, like here's what I'll get. And it was the first time I was able to like kind of decouple it from all the emotions that I had tied to it.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely right, because again, most of our clients that we work with, they haven't hired a president before, so they think they know on the front end kind of what they're looking for, but then when they see 5 candidates or 6 candidates next to one another, they say, I didn't even think about that. That would really be, or maybe I was over prioritizing this experience or that experience, and they. So yeah, it gives them a real good, because sometimes you just, like say, you just don't kind of know it till you see it completely, and so that's why we do it that way. And then we also have our the project leader that they're working with sitting in on those interviews too, because the project leader conducted the interviews on our side.
Oh, cool.
We have them sit in on the interviews at the client just to observe and just see, is this the same person we saw?
That's super cool.
How they represent themselves here versus in our office.
Is that common for recruiters?
I don't think that's real common. I know there are a few other search firms that do that, but it's not common in our industry. I started doing it a few years after we started Keystone, and I would never go back because it's
What a no brainer, Mike. I'm sitting here going like, when I was in, I was just using my own judgment, which I've never done this before. Never looked at these people, and so to have someone sit there and observe not only the owner but also the executive, observe the interaction, and this actually is kind of almost answering the question I was going to ask next. If you from Dr. Sabrina's interview, we were talking about how many owners or entrepreneurs will sell themselves that the person is going to solve all their problems. So there's this emotional desire to essentially lie to yourself. And so like, I was going to ask you, like, how do you guys handle that, or can you spot that? And obviously if you're sitting in interviews, it'll probably give you a better chance to do that.
Yeah, we can oftentimes spot that. And, sitting in on those interviews is really informative for us. We don't lead any of the questioning, and we don't have a bias in which of the 5 they choose. I mean, we're working on that's the beauty of working on a retainer basis, is that they're not paying us for the individual body. They're paying us for the process to get the very best fit. So we can really objectively, after those 5 candidates have come in, we can run a debrief session and just say, okay, let's go back to the things we said we were looking for, and how do they fit on these parameters, because I know what happens when if we're not there. Sometimes it can be a great conversation about football, but we didn't really, the interview didn't really hit on the things that we said we wanted in the job, right? And
totally.
Now I like this candidate a lot more because they're a Packer fan or a Viking fan or whatever it is.
True.
And again, that's just kind of human nature too, and it's something that so we're there to kind of make sure, in a way to sort of make sure that the right questions get asked, the
job's getting done, the task at hand, right?
And then also to be advocates for the owner in that situation, to say, hey, this is a different person than I saw in my office. They're behaving differently in front of you or in front of your board than they were in front of me, and that's a big red flag.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. So where in that process then do you go bring it? Do the other executives have a say, or do you get them involved?
So after that first round of interviews, the way our process works is then they would narrow it down to a couple of finalists that they would bring back for more discussions, and then we get the other leadership team members involved, and that's always customized depending on how the team is set up and who the folks are and so forth. But we want to make sure that 2 things. We want to make sure that the candidates get a chance to see who is the team that they'd be working with and inheriting in essence, and then also that the leadership team gets a chance to see the potential candidates that they would work for, and there are times when someone on the leadership team finds something that we didn't. Says I have a concern about something, and we follow up on it, and that's
super,
real. So
super cool.
And part of that is just the philosophy that we want to put as many eyeballs on the candidates as possible from different angles to see who they really are. And so
then
yes,
how long, how many meetings, or how, like, because I think about the whole hire slow, fire fast, like that whole, like, of the owner meeting them and then the executives, like, how many of those meetings do you feel are sufficient, and what is too much?
Yeah. So I don't know that there is a too much, honestly. The way that our process works, we're narrowing it down. We've gone out and done this thorough screening of candidates. So we're narrowing it down to the 5. We're sitting in, helping you get it down to the 2. And then there's got to be one more set of interviews after that with a single finalist. So that's a 3-stage kind of 3 set of interviews process. But I've had situations where 5, 6, something we missed or something we're not 100% comfortable with, let's bring them back again. I think as long as it's as long as you're not wasting time in some of the earlier meetings and so forth. I think I tell people, you got to make sure, right? Yeah. And so, and we're also incorporating at that stage of the process, we're also incorporating those assessments I mentioned, so that OmniView and so forth. So before they would do that last interview, they would have that assessment data as well. So now if there's something that comes out in the assessment data, we want to make sure we're hitting on it in that final interview. We don't want to do the assessment after all the interviews are done.
Right. That's so awesome. And I have a client, I want to say it was like 12 meetings, and he actually flew out, and him and his wife flew out to meet with the new executive and their spouse. And like, to that point, like, it was just like I wasn't sure if it was maybe too much or not, but I mean, it's like, but it's to the whole point of the outcome is we need to feel as much confidence as possible that this is a hand glove
Yeah, yeah.
relationship, right?
And I think as long as in those 12 meetings there was something you were trying to accomplish,
Mm-hmm.
and there was something realistic that, hey, there's something else that we're checking. But the alternative, I mean, if a candidate feels like their time is being wasted and they're going in for interviews that don't really matter, meetings that don't really matter, then you do run the risk that you're going to turn the candidate off.
Right,
They're going to
right.
say, hey, these guys just don't have their act together, so I'm not going to come join.
Well, I was just going to ask you is like, I bet you, well, have you ever had a time where the owner is like, it pretty much, it's like an obvious fit for all of the right reasons, but then all of a sudden the owner is going, I don't know, like, like the cold feet of like kind of like the whole, like almost the same exact experience of like they're not selling the business because it's emotionally based or something. How do you address that?
Yeah, again, there's an art to that. It depends on the individual, but there's almost always a point where it gets sort of emotional, and so sometimes it's just kind of talking them through that. Sometimes it's giving them a day or two to cool down and kind of start looking at it logically again. So yeah, just kind of walking them through that again, just kind of being understanding that this is not something they do every day, and this is their baby, this is their business. I mean, they're taking a big risk bringing in somebody to run their business, and through our process we have a lot of data points. We go through a number of interviews, and you mentioned the 12 meetings, and I'm assuming maybe that they're meeting with individuals. One of the things we do is we try to get groups together so that that first round of interviews, if it's might be the owner and board members, or we want to do group interviews so that everybody's hearing the same thing at the same time. It also saves more and more of those meetings.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, you're probably right about that actually. So then with let's say the ink is signed, and like what do you see that results in the highest probability of that sticking long term?
Yeah, so there's a few things. Onboarding is critically important, very, very important. So getting off on that right foot, because there has to be number one, there has to be a trust relationship built between that owner and the president or integrator, COO, whatever it is. So having them spend a considerable amount of time together in the first month, and then really over the first 90 days and even over the first year. In the EOS system, which we're very familiar with, they have what they call the same page meeting for that visionary and integrator, and at least once a month they're spending half a day together. My integrator and we spend 2.5 hours every other week, and it's we're talking about business issues, but we're also continuing to build that rapport, because someday the shit is going to hit the fan, and you want
that social reservoir as big as you possibly can have, right?
Exactly, you got it. So then there's other things to the onboarding process too, like obviously getting to know the customers and the employees and the team and all those kind of things. And so really following a plan over the first 90 days to make sure the person's assimilating into the business. And that we see a lot of times owners they don't want to, but they unintentionally skip it. We're all busy, we're running like crazy, and before we know it, 90 days has gone by, and we haven't spent any time together.
Right. I mean, there's I can only imagine too, the hired someone that's 2.5 bills, big comp plan, previous experience. You got this, Mike. Going to Florida, right? Like,
yeah, right. That's another piece of it I'm glad you brought that up, because it's managing expectations. In the first 90 days, first 6 months, sometimes the first year, this person's not going to be able to move the needle for you very far on EBIT. They got to come in, they got to get to know the team, they got to get to know the strengths and weaknesses of the players, they got to get to know your customers. You just got to be, as an owner, you got to be understanding that it's going to take a little while. So you got to kind of go slow to go fast. And so managing those expectations on the front end is really important. And same thing for the candidate that's coming in. Sometimes an executive wants to come in and make their mark. And I'll show them right away what I can do. And so managing that from their side too, to say, look, you're going to make in the long run, you're going to be a lot farther ahead if you take some time and really get to know the lay of the land here.
How long are you guys involved after that person is hired?
So we have kind of a framework for onboarding. We do check-ins at 30, 60, 90, and a year just to see how it's going. We can't, unfortunately, we're not there on site, so we can't kind of control and make sure that those happen as much as we'd like to. But we do stay connected just to make sure things are kind of on track. And if there's anything we can help with, it's gotten off track, or just sort of encouraging to make sure that onboarding work gets done.
Mm-hmm.
We do that.
So, and you don't have to disclose any of your numbers or anything like that. I'm just kind of like maybe for the listeners, or like, what is normal or expected for the arrangement of how an engagement with a recruiter should work?
Yeah.
And feel free to even say like, what is like advantageous for people and what is not, like what to be looking out for as well.
Yeah. So as a, there's in our industry, in the search industry, there's kind of two models, and then there's a few hybrids, but really the two basic models are contingency search and retained search. So contingency search is most often what you'll see for kind of mid-level positions or individual contributor positions, and that's where you don't pay anything unless you hire the person. So they go out and the recruiter goes out, tries to find you the right people, and sends them to you. And if you like them and you hire them, you pay the fee. On a retainer basis, like we are, you're paying us 1/3 of their first year compensation, but we're breaking that into 3 payments. So 1/3 of it when we get started with the project, 1/3 of it when we come to you with that short list of candidates, that 5 candidates, and you say, "Yep, I'm moving forward, and I'm going to interview and move forward with these candidates." And then the last one when it's finished. So we are on the hook basically to get it done, and you have a couple stop gaps in there to stop. But with an executive position, I think this is really important for people to understand, is that you really don't want to do an executive position on contingency, because
the amount of work you just described that you were doing for anybody that's like normal business owner wouldn't expect you to do that much work without getting paid.
Yeah, well, and it's not even so much about us. It's about the client, and that you want somebody who's going to be dedicated to go out there and find, and has the time to go find you the very best candidate. So what happens in the contingency world is it's a great race. Who can get an acceptable candidate over there as fast as possible and get paid. And I used to work contingency early in my career, and for IT positions, and that's the way it works. Is I'm going to work on a position for 2 weeks, and if I get if I get paid, great. And if I don't, I'll move on to the next one, because there's a lot of positions out there to work on. You just don't want that mentality at the executive level. You want to hire a firm that has the time to go out there. They know it. They're dedicated to you. They're telling your story, whatever it is, 150 times, and has the chance to then compare candidates one to another, instead of just sending them to you and saying, "Hey, you figure it out."
Yeah, it's Mike. I find so many similarities to your industry as the broker and investment banker, because like those two models you just talked about, I could like layer that right on conceptually. It's like brokers, volume, get the things closed. The market's telling the person what it's worth, but it's just get shit done now. Investment banker, it's like learn and understand the business and go out and find an intentional set of candidates. I mean, it's just a very different approach. And I think, hence the whole point of having these conversations is like the white glove approach that you're taking is going to increase the chances of success. Because like I've been through multiple executives in the past, and like it's exhausting when it doesn't work. And so you want to do like, I'm willing to pay a couple extra more bucks.
It's expensive, and you're hiring these people because you want to build value in your company. And so if you make the wrong hire, you can lose value very easily. And so I don't want to disparage necessarily contingency search either. There's definitely a place for that, and I think when you're talking about positions at an individual contributor level, or even a manager level, first line supervisor, that sort of thing, that's the right approach, because it's going to cost you a little less, and you're going to get it done faster. You probably don't want to wait 90 to 120 days to get a bank teller.
Right.
So you wouldn't do that on a retainer basis with someone like us.
You said it perfectly earlier, Mike. I mean, it's just all about expectation setting, right? And I think, in the services space, which a lot of the people that are on the show and a lot of the things we're talking about, it's just like there's a lot of these ideas and concepts, and it's about part of the purpose of the show is like, let's get the expectations in line. So like whatever feels the most like appropriate approach, it's just about expecting what the approach is going to deliver, right? Not expecting doing one thing and expecting another.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think our industry has done a good job of really explaining to folks what we do and how we do it. It's kind of we sign a contract and then we kind of go away and do this magic behind the scenes and nobody really knows what we're up to. And we come back with these magic candidates and nobody really, and as a customer, you really can't tell, have they done their homework or not? And so we've tried to make it as transparent as possible. There's confidentiality things. I can't, share resumes and candidates and things like that, as we're going through the process until I've got permission to do so. But we try to be as open and transparent with our customers as what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're doing it.
It's awesome, Mike. I just appreciate it so much. I mean, it's I think, you and I have talked for years now, and I just challenge everybody to just explore what it would look like to hire someone to replace their own job. Because there's so many people that just either they don't know if it's worth it running a business. They don't know what and they're just paralyzed with this huge thing. But it's like, hey, this is a nice baby step. And I think, one of the things we've covered in previous episodes that I didn't send you to, Mike, is like, make it easy for you to understand make it easy for you to see the visibility of like, you can maintain your cash flow through distributions while hiring this $250,000 person. So if it's going to cost you $20,000 a month for this person, make sure that you can maintain your income. And then it becomes obvious whether you want to keep your job or not. Like, it's not going to sacrifice. You're not sacrificing your personal income for this. Then it's just truly, I think it's just like a way to get your sanity back, to at least think about what the hell you want to do next.
Yeah. Yeah. And it opens up options. I know you and I have a client together that you sent our way. Thank you. But the owner that wants to do some different things, step away from the day to day, and he's not sure what he's going to do as far as the long term, whether he's going to sell to PE or sell to an ESOP but bringing in a president CEO right now to run the day-to-day is going to allow him to do some of the things he wants to do in life outside of the business.
Which is move to Hawaii. That's what he's doing in June.
And stay connected to the business and provide value in a different way. And then, a few years down the road, figure out do I want to sell? Do I want to continue to own? Do I want to take some chips off the table? Do I want to sell to my employees? So I always think when you get to that stage, having the most options available to you is going to be the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not committing to anything. That's like, it's an easy way to not deal with it's an easy way to deal with the commitment fear, right? It's like, hey, I'm just committing to hiring someone, I'm not committing to selling. And it's also like, Mikey, I think about like everything you just walked through over the last hour. This is to just hire a president or executive. People think that they're going to sell a company in less time and find a private equity partner that they're going to share ownership with in like a faster process. And it's just ridiculous. Like this level of attention should be like, each next step should be that intentional, because then you're going to like not regret it. But I mean, truly, it's like, all right, I want out. And it's like, well, you just sold your company to half of it to someone and you don't even know. Think about everything that you just went through just to find one person to work with you. Yeah.
Yeah. That's very true. It's very true.
So, Mike, for someone that is listening and wants to, like, they're intrigued, what's the best way to continue exploring it? Do you have material? What's the best ways to reach out to you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly go out to our website at www.keystonesearch.com. We have a lot of good materials out there. I'm always glad to talk to owners just to spitball. I mean, what might this look like? What might this cost? All those kind of things. And here's what I got on my team, and here's what I'm thinking. I love doing that, and so anybody can reach out to me directly and just have a conversation.
Love it.
We have actually for those people that are running EOS, we actually have a tool called the integrator continuum.
Oh, nice.
That kind of helps an owner visionary kind of peg what level of person they would need in this role and sort of the skills that would be necessary for their particular business. So.
Is that on your website then?
It is on the website,
okay.
And I'm glad to walk anybody through that in person as well. So
awesome.
Yeah, I'm not an attorney. I don't charge if you call me on the phone. I'm not gonna. The meter's not running. So I love to have conversations with owners and hear about their business and what they're trying to do.
Love it, Mike. Last question for you. The word intentional. I don't know if we had renamed the podcast when the last time you were on or not, but love to hear people's definition of it. So I'm putting you on the spot. What's your definition of the word intentional?
I would say having a plan and being authentic to yourself.
Ooh. Well, for not being prepared, that was well done, sir.
Well, it's funny. I'm working with a lot of entrepreneurs and owners. There's this idea of, success, and what does success mean? And success always has to mean you're X amount bigger, or you own this or you own that. And that's not really, any owner out there, any entrepreneur that started a business and ran one, you're already a success. So, it's about figuring out what do you want. And
yeah.
For being intentional, like you said, it comes in a lot of different flavors. It doesn't have to be, that you're gigantic and have three
all the vanity metrics that I've been spewing out, like revenue and employee count, and it's like, who cares?
and sometimes, in fact, a lot of times we'll have conversations with an owner, and at the end of it, we'll say, this probably isn't something you should do, or something you should do right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just hire somebody just not ready. You're just not ready for it, and that's okay.
Yeah,
it's still a success.
Yeah. They call me when you really don't want to do your insurance renewal or your open enrollment. Mike, thank you so much for coming back on the show. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Ryan. It's been a lot of fun. Appreciate it.